Our first speaker is Joshua Conrad Jackson. Josh is a grad student at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. His work focuses on the ecological and social factors that give rise to cultural diversity and the impact of that diversity on human behavior and belief. He has applied this perspective in papers on the nature of human religion, emotions, social norms, revenge, moral judgment, and many other domains of life. You may wonder why a graduate student would be part of a panel with many distinguished speakers, but that's because Josh is already distinguished in himself. His work has appeared in several journals, been covered in Newsweek. And interestingly, Josh got his start here as well, tracking social group formation by rigging cameras up in Forsyth Bar Stadium. So please join me in welcoming back Josh Jackson.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to start this the way that Jamin started yesterday with a small poll. It's tough to see everyone, but I'm going to do my best. So just let's say that in the future there's some technology that we've invented that allows people to live forever, and you feel that it's reliable and it's pretty feasible, it doesn't cost your whole salary. I'd just like to know who in this room would take that up? Who would live forever considering those parameters? All right. So if you're wondering, it's about 60%, I would say, which I just thought it would be a smaller percentage just because of all the concerns that people have about immortality. But the people who did put their hands up, you're not alone. Pretty much as long as humans have lived, they've chased immortality. So this is a German painting from the 16th century, the Fountain of Youth, and this mythic place or potion has gone by many names throughout human history. The Persians called it Abi Hayat, which means water of life. The ancient Greeks and Indians called it Amrita, which means immortality nectar. The Japanese called it Manyoshu, waters of rejuvenation. And long before Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone was the substance that you could ingest to prolong life forever. So many of the earliest emperors and kings and queens would chase these mythic substances, sometimes to extreme ends. So this is the Chinese Emperor Shi Hong from the Qin dynasty. And he was so obsessed with immortality that he sent away two of his palace's best scientists with fleets of ships to try to discover the elixir of life from exotic lands. And of course, they never came back. And when they didn't come back, he died trying to drink liquid gold, which he thought was the secret for living forever. And you might think that this is an isolated incident, but just a few hundred years later, the Jiazhong Emperor of the Chinese Ming dynasty died drinking liquid mercury, which he thought was the elixir. It's like, not liquid gold, but mercury will really help me out. And you might think that these only happen in ancient history, but people are still doing very similar things. This startup company, Ambrosia Health, which only closed down a couple of months ago, would charge people $8,000, and generally elderly people would get transfusions of younger people's blood, which Ambrosia claimed would prolong life. And so these stories might seem exceptional, but they're hardly exceptions. Many people throughout history have chased immortality, doing these kind of strange things. But they've all met the same fate, and that's this fate because it's impossible for humans to live forever. Or is it? What I'm going to be speaking about today is a different kind of immortality. You can live forever as a body on Earth, but you can also live forever in people's minds, what I'm going to call perceived immortality. And I'm not just talking about living forever in history books and art and sculptures. I'm actually speaking about when people think that you have transcended death as a ghost or a spirit. And this is a very plausible thing to many people around the world who believe in ghosts and spirits. Now, we know that there's no secret to actual immortality, biological immortality, but is there an elixir to perceived immortality? Today, I'm going to suggest that there is, and the answer lies in morality. Folktales, ritual, and everyday language suggests that people have a basic intuition to see good or evil souls as more likely to persist death as a spirit than morally neutral souls. These intuitions recur across religious traditions in Africa and East Asia, the Pacific Islands, and the Americas. They're not completely universal, but they also recur in major religious traditions today. So Christian doctrine has many places that souls can live on after death, including limbo or purgatory. But most Christians believe in heaven or hell. It's a place for evil souls and a place for good souls. And when you ask people what historical figures are most likely to have reached immortality in some form as a spirit, people are more likely to say that morally evil figures like Hitler or Stalin or Osama bin Laden are more likely to reach immortality, and morally good figures like Abraham Lincoln or Martin Luther King Jr. than people who were very successful and well-known, but not known for their morality, like Amelia Earhart, for example. Now, that's one thing, but it's tough to know what people mean when they're talking about immortality in historical figures. And so we actually wanted to know would people be more likely to perceive contact with the ghosts of good and evil people compared to morally neutral people. And so with one of our first studies, we set up a seance within our laboratory. We brought people in, we lit a candle in a very small, dark room, and we had people read descriptions of someone who died decades ago right where they were sitting. And this person, for some people, they read about someone who was evil and cruel. They were a murderer during their lifetime. Other people read about someone who was charitable and a saint, was morally good and kind. And some people read about somebody who was very successful and well-known around town, but they weren't known for being particularly moral or immoral. And as they read these descriptions, people wore these big headphones that played white noise, and we told them that under certain conditions, mediums could report hearing the voices of the dead in these headphones. So this is what the setup looked like. And I'm going to play you a video that shows how participants did this seance, and what was important, we really wanted to drive home that somebody could be in the room, and so we took a page out of Jesse's book, and we rigged a painting of this person who they were reading about to fall off the wall halfway through their reading of the descriptions. So I just apologize for the profanity in this video, but you're going to see what happened.
Oh, shit. Are you kidding me? Okay.
All right, so this guy seems nervous, and most of our participants were. But our goal wasn't just to make people nervous. Our goal was to test whether people would be more likely to perceive contact with the ghosts of the dead through the headphones that they were wearing. You can see this guy's wearing them. When the person who had died was morally good or evil versus neutral. And the first thing that we saw when we looked at the data for this study was that most people actually did believe that they'd heard a voice in this white noise. That wasn't just due to us putting a voice there. And so people, 77% of people were either fairly sure that they'd heard a voice or were definitely sure. And not everyone who participated in this study had equally strong belief in the afterlife. And so what we expected was that people who had stronger beliefs in the afterlife would be more likely to hear a voice than people who had less strong beliefs. But importantly, we expected that people who had read the description of the morally good or evil soul, the person who had died in this room whose painting fell off the wall, would be more likely to hear voices than people who'd read a description of the morally neutral person. And so when we looked at the results for this study, they were striking. What we found first is that when people read about a morally good or evil individual, they were highly likely to hear this person's voice in the white noise, and especially so when they had strong belief in the afterlife. But when they read the description of someone who was morally neutral, they were less likely to hear the voice, and especially when they had low belief in when they had high belief in the afterlife. And so this early study suggested to us that we had discovered this elixir to perceived immortality. Just being good and evil sent you on this staircase to the perceived afterlife. But next we wanted to know, are good and evil people really taking the same staircase? Because in many religious traditions, good and evil people live on after death, the spirits, but they don't really live on in the same way. People seem to have an intuition that evil souls live on trapped in specific contained locations whereas good souls live on beyond time and space in a sort of transcendent state of immortality. So for example, in Christianity, in Islam, and Zoroastrianism, there are specific places where evil people go and where they cannot leave, like the House of Lies or Hell, whereas good people transcend to places like the House of Song or Heaven, where they have a lot more freedom. In many forms of Buddhism and Hinduism, unenlightened souls are reincarnated back into constraining bodies, while enlightened souls escape into moksha. And these type of intuitions even recur across smaller belief systems. So for example, amongst the Iroquois people, evil souls are bound to live in their houses forever without leaving, whereas good souls amongst the Guajiro people in South America transcend into the sky. So people will light bonfires along the ground to guide the path of the soul into the sky where it will live forever. And in groups that believe in spiritual possession is often a form of demonic possession. Spirits and ghosts who are evil are more likely to possess specific objects or people that can be contagious than good souls. And you even see these type of intuitions in pop culture, where when evil people die, they go to specific places, but when good people die, they transcend beyond time and space. So like the most important result of all, when Voldemort dies in Harry Potter, his soul is bound to specific Horcruxes where he's forced to reside until he can be reincarnated. Whereas when Obi-Wan dies in Star Wars, he goes to the ethereal realm of the Force where he can watch over and communicate to Luke. And when you think about immortality in this way, it makes sense why in Dante's Divine Comedy, the 7 circles of hell grow narrower as the sins grow less forgivable. And it also makes sense that when we go to haunted houses, we go to houses where we detect ghosts, we often assume that those ghosts are evil, so residing in this specific physical location. Underlying both of these phenomena might be a basic human instinct to see good souls living on in a transcendent state and evil souls living on in a trapped state. Now, to actually test this question, we designed questionnaires that people could take where they would rate historical figures on how much they had attained trapped immortality, living on in a particular location, versus transcendent immortality, living on beyond time and space. So we didn't actually use these words trapped and transcendent immortality, but we designed items in a questionnaire that would capture these intuitions. And our hypothesis was that when people read about the souls of historically evil figures, they would ascribe them trapped immortality. Historically good figures would be ascribed transcendent immortality, and morally neutral figures would get neither. And that's what we saw. The morally good people, doesn't work. Morally good people are in green, very intuitive. The morally evil people are in red. They get high levels of trapped immortality. And the morally neutral people get not particularly high levels of either. And we replicated this result with descriptions we just made up instead of specific historical figures. We made up descriptions of people who were good in their lifetime, evil in their lifetime, and people still ascribe transcendent immortality to the fictional good souls, trapped immortality to the fictional evil souls, and neither type particularly high levels to morally neutral souls. You notice in this study that actually people give a little more transcendent immortality to neutral souls, and I think it's an interesting result because there's some research in experimental philosophy showing that people have a basic intuition to think that people, when you don't get a lot of moral information about them, are just basically good. And so I think that makes sense in the context of these data. But are we really explaining why we might have an intuition that ghosts in haunted houses are evil? It might just be that we like moral souls and we want to send them to nice places, and transcendent immortality sounds a lot nicer than trapped immortality. To test this issue, we designed one last set of studies where we asked people to give us locations that were similarly pleasant or unpleasant, but varied in how trapped or transcendent they were. So none of us would want to spend a particularly long time in a desert or a cave. They're both pretty unpleasant places. But whereas a cave is expansive and wide open, a desert is narrow and constraining. And then we asked a different set of people, what kinds of spirits they would expect to encounter in these places. And we found that when people met spirits in deserts, expansive deserts, they would be more likely to think that they were good spirits, But when people encountered spirits in caves, constraining caves, they were more likely to think that they were evil spirits. And this replicated across various other locations that were similarly pleasant or unpleasant. And so I just want to close with a quote from Woody Allen, who once said, I don't want to die. I live on through my work. I want to live on by not dying. And Woody Allen might never get his wish, but I think that these studies show that he can achieve a slightly more concrete sense of immortality than just living on in history books. By being good or evil, you can actually be perceived as a spirit or ghost after you've died. And so, as you leave this conference today, my advice to you is if you want to live forever, just be a saint or a sinner for the rest of your days, but choose wisely, because your choice could determine whether you live trapped in a specific location forever or whether you can escape time and space into transcendent immortality. Thank you.